most people, especially the experienced ones, some of this is going to be teaching you to suck eggs, so it'll be nice and quick. But we can go into some detail if we want. I'm not going to go through every weapon and every type of ammunition that's in Arma, but I'm going to touch on a few things that might give you something to think about when either you're making up a loadout for yourself or you're preparing a mission for some of the others. So off we go. You can read it. The most basic skill in Arma that all players need is the ability to fire their weapon and hit what they're aiming at. It's ideal that you can deal with that threat with one shot or one round, but that is very rarely possible. And the distance to target, strength or toughness of target, and the environmental conditions all play a part in how effective you will be against an enemy. And it is therefore vital you have an understanding of the basic physics of shooting, irrespective of the type of weapon and the capabilities of that weapon. Now what we're going into here is we're talking about zeroing in a minute. And the reason we're doing this is because somebody did ask before one of the ops, one of the times, what do you guys mean actually when you say zeroed? Right, so we're going into that. Right, basic sights. You've all seen sights like this. You pick up a weapon, doesn't matter what type it is, they'll have a sight of some sort. It could be something really basic, almost what looks like a screw sticking out the end of the barrel down to like here. The grenade launchers is just basically a flat plate with markings on it. Iron sights, we know what those are. A rear sight situated above the breech, foresight at the end of the barrel, and you line them up. And optics, we've seen all the different types of optics. We've seen red dots and the high magnification scopes, etc., that are used by snipers. So you know that if you go down the list, there are dozens of different sights. So what I'm saying here, despite those dozens of different sights and all the different complexities and all the rest of it, they all do exactly the same job. They are to give you a sight line, an imaginary line drawn through the sights to the target. So whatever is in the centre of your sight is directly on the sight line. The bullet, however, is going to come from the barrel or the bore of your weapon. This is known as the bore line. And forgetting the ballistic trajectory for the moment, if you were to shine a laser at a target through the bore of your rifle, then look down your sights, because the sights are mounted on top of the weapon and are therefore parallel to the bore, you would see the laser dot below the centre point of your sight. Therefore, to align the sight line to the bore line, it requires that we make adjustments to bring these two lines together at a given distance. And that's all that zeroing is about. It's making sure that that sight line crosses the bore line, although not quite, but we'll go into that in a second, at a given distance. And that's when they say we're 0 to 200. At 200, those two intersect. Now, as I've put underneath, this would be fairly simple if bullets travelled like lasers, but they don't. They follow a trajectory, which is not a nice straight line. We'll look a little bit at what changes that trajectory later, but suffice to say, a weapon has to be zeroed to the type of ammunition it'll be using. If that ammunition is changed, then the weapon will no longer be zeroed. And I'm not talking about caliber, because obviously it's got to be the same caliber, otherwise it's not going to work. But you can get different calibers with different loads behind them. So the amount of powder in the cartridge, etc., will change how that bullet flies, right? And if you change that, you have to re-zero the weapon. So, bit of a pictorial one. I nicked this graphic from online somewhere. Ignore the bit below 200 yards because any bullet that's travelling like that over 200 yards is probably a pop gun or an air rifle. But that's the principle of it, in that your eye lining up on the sight, the bullet trajectory, and at whatever distance you want to zero it at, that's where the two of them have to come together. So how accurate this zeroing is and the distance you need to zero out is all going to be dependent on the type of mission and the weapon you're using. For most infantry uses, the weapon will be zeroed to between 200 and 300, typically 200 for iron, 300 optics. And that's adequate for most engagements. Yes, we do sometimes engage it further out, but we make adjustments for that, and we'll be talking about adjustments in that in a minute. But in a CQB environment, even though your weapon's zeroed at 200 to 300, if you hit someone, if you aim at centre mass when you come into a room, you're going to hit them about an inch higher than you're aiming. Maybe you're still going to put them down. So that zeroing at really close range doesn't really make a great deal of difference. If you engage at greater distances, but however, you're going to have to adjust your sights. So many optics will have the gradation so that you can actually judge it in the optic at far range. But obviously, if you're on iron sights, it's simply a matter of aiming a little bit higher or a little bit lower and judging where your fall of shot is. Right. Weapon accuracy. Now, a lot of people will have seen this when you're picking a weapon. Up in the top, sort of rightish, leftish side of the screen, it will give you some details on the weapon. And one of the big things it has is the MOA. And the MOA is the minute of angle. And it's basically, it's the inherent accuracy of the weapon, right? So a minute of angle is 1/60th of a degree. And as I've put there, if you think of the minute of angle as a circular cone that extends out from the gun barrel. So if you imagine it's a tiny dot in the centre of your gun barrel and it extends out into a cone, right? If you were able to lock that weapon into a gun vise and you were in ideal conditions, so we'll just say that you've got a nice big long hanger that's over 100 metres long, you've got a 100-metre range, or 100-yard range, and you aim that weapon down there, fixed in the vise, then every round will land within a 1-inch circle at 100 yards away for an MOA of 1, right? So it's that's the inherent accuracy of the weapon, taking out every other factor, the factor of how good the shooter is, the wind, all the rest of it, right? So a weapon that's got an MOA of 1 will shoot a 1-inch circle at 100 yards, which is pretty accurate. The mathematics behind all that is quite complicated, but to simplify things, for every 100 yards, you 1 inch to the diameter of the circle. So if you have a weapon of an MOA of 1, then at 100 yards, the bullet will all fall within a 1-inch circle. At 200 yards, it'll now be 2 inches. So you can imagine that cone's getting bigger the further away you are. Right, and we mention this because if you've got the choice of choosing your weapon for an op, and you may engage enemies at a distance, look for those weapons with a lower MOA. The lower the MOA, the more inherently accurate the actual weapon is before you get involved.
Riff.
Yeah.
Are you able to just maybe off the top of your head name drop a few that you know are quite good in different classes of gun?
I'm going on to that now. Right. So I've done testing on most of the weapons in Arma with an MOA under 2, because obviously I'm looking for the sniper weapons. As you might expect, the weapon with the lowest MOA is the M200 Intervention Sniper Rifle. It's got an MOA of 0.6. So for that, at 100 yards, right, that circle is just over half an inch if you were fastening that in a vise and shooting it, right? But the M16, A1 and A4, they've got an MOA of only 0.7. They're only 0.1 above that sniper rifle, which is a fantastic MOA for an assault weapon, right? The Heckler & Koch 416 CQC version is also a 0.7. So there's some very accurate weapons in Arma for most types of missions. The most of my testing admittedly has been done on Blue 4 sides, and I really need to start going through the Op 4 ones, but those are good examples of some really accurate weapons. And underneath, as you put there, surprisingly, there's a few LMGs that have MOAs of under 2. And the L110 has an MOA of 1.2 and is very accurate. The MG36, which I tested, it's got a higher MOA of 1.7, but if you put that thing on a bipod, it will shred anything out to about 700 metres and it's got hardly any movement. So for me, those two LMGs are just astonishing if you use them for accuracy. Right. We probably all know this. Changing the 0 point of your weapon is simple. Page up, page down. That's it. Put in there a note, however, not all weapons allow changing the 0 point. We're not going to go through all the weapons in Arma here. So it's down to you to look at this aspect of a weapon when you're evaluating it for use in an operation. This can also guide your choice of optic. If you don't have the ability to change your 0 point, then it may be best to look for an optic that has a reticule with gradations to allow you to more accurately adjust your aiming point. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So that's a typical sniper type scope, right? First of all, I've got to put a note of caution. Some sights will have numbers on the y-axis, and for some sights that will relate to yardages. But generally, they're milliradians of adjustment, so don't expect it to relate to yardage. And to give you an idea what a milliradian is, it's a very accurate adjustment of a sight. A radian equates to 57 degrees. I'm not going to get into the whole maths of it, but basically, a radian is when the radius equates to the circumference of the circle. So just think of it. 1 radian is 57 degrees. So a milliradian is roughly a 20th of a degree that you're adjusting those sights by, right? And for those of you who have looked at the more accurate sights, when you do your up, down, and you're changing the click points on the top, right? 1 click is a 10th of a milliradian. So you're now adjusting those sights by 1/200th of a degree, right? Which is pretty accurate, really. So just to simplify matters there, and I'm sure you guys know this, if you look at the sight to the left, imagine you've shot at an enemy who's exactly in the centre of your crosshairs, but you see the bullet splash where the red dot is, then your next shot should be taken with that point on the centre mass of your target, right? It's pretty standard stuff. Right, I'm not going to go into the complexity of long-range shooting, but the only way to do it accurately, and I know there's all sorts of gadgets in game which I'll be honest, I don't use. I use a range card. I have a little book here. It has the different weapons with a range of scopes, and I go on the range and I start at 100 meters and I zero it in, and then I zero it at 200, and I make a note in my book of what click settings I've got, and I do that out to 1500 yards. And that's kind of what that explains. There's no substitute for spending time in the range with longer range stuff. You just got to try different combinations, have a play, see what works for you. Right, so these are things that you need to think about, A, for yourself when you're making a loadout, if you've got the opportunity to make your own loadouts and use them in a game, but also for mission makers. Often the choice of weapons is subjective. We all know the players in here who will always say straight away AK or whatever, right? And personal preference does play a large role, but there are things that you need to consider when making that choice. And there's no substitute for testing different combinations on the range to ascertain its suitability for a given role. Caliber size. There's always arguments about which caliber is better. The more modern 5.56 against 7.62. And the shorter answer is they both are. It's just dependent what you're going to use them for. I mean, we spoke briefly about it before the mission the other day, James. I think you were saying about the 5.56 has got a greater penetration power, or penetration, if you like, on a human body. And it does. And it does because of simple physics. If you think about it, if you prick your finger with a blunt darning needle, nothing happens. You prick it with a syringe and it goes in. So a thinner round or a thinner bullet is always going to pierce more, right? Where the 7.62 scores is that its actual energy that it delivers at the end is generally vastly more, right? 5.56 tend to go in and stay in a body. 7.62 will normally, small hole at the front, fucking really big hole, right? It just depends what you're trying to achieve. You know, again, 7.62 sometimes you can think it's a bit overkill when you're in CQC because you really want that rattling inside a building. But there's actually a bigger thing to think of than just that there, right? So as I've put in there, the 7.62 is longer range, higher muzzle energy than 5.56, but the 5.56 is actually higher velocity when it leaves. But the main reason that they changed was weight. You can carry almost 3 times as much 5.56 ammo as you can 7.62. And that was the main reason, or one of the main reasons for them changing to 5.56. That and the fact that because of the higher muzzle velocity, the 5.56 has a flatter trajectory. That makes it easier for people who are not regular shooters. The 5.56 weapons, you pick up an SA-80, it is far easier to fire effectively than a 7.62 if you're picking that up for the first time. 7.62 you pick up for the first time. If you hit the figure 12 at 25 meters, you'll be doing well. It takes practice, a lot of practice. 7.62. The 5.56, less recoil, everything like that. Much easier to fire. I'm going to talk about something actually. I'm not going to go into this one straight away because I've just done some tests before we came in, which relates to that last thing about weight. And that weight thing actually does work in Arma as well. If you actually compare 7.62 rounds and 5.56, like as simple a sight as possible on top of the weapon for CQB, you need to look at what alternatives do the sight give me. Can I switch from optic to a red dot or iron sight on top of the optic? Is the sight matched to the rifle's capability? Now, what I mean by that, when I was doing testing of some of the different weapons and combinations of weapon to sight and things like that, if you've got a nice big sight on top of the weapon, it might be, I don't know, something like a DH5, 20 times magnification, looks a brilliant sight. But if you suddenly see that when you get to about 700 meters, the change needed to go to 800 meters is lots of clicks, maybe a couple of, well, sometimes even 3 or 4 millirads in total. That generally means you've reached the end of that rifle's capability. Anything over about 700-800 meters, then you're now in the lap of the gods as to whether you'll hit it. So why are you carrying that fucking big sight that weighs so much? So it's important to match the sight to the capability of the weapon that you're using, right? And don't carry around a couple of pounds of glass when actually, you know what? Yeah, you might be able to see it, but you'll never fucking hit it. Another big thing to think of is the sight's primary or secondary night vision capability. And that's something that a lot of people screw up on. And mission making as well, where we've all experienced it. We've gone out on a night mission and the scope we've got is not going to work with our nods. I know sometimes it's a deliberate thing by the mission makers, but sometimes it is an oversight, and it's something that you should consider when you're making loadouts. So I've called this types of ammunition, but it's not really, because I'm really talking here about magazines. So STANAG stands for Standing NATO Agreement. It's just an agreement of what sort of fitting the magazine will have, right? The word STANAG doesn't actually relate to magazines. There's a number missing there. It'll be STANAG, 47531 or something like that, because there are thousands of STANAGs, Standing NATO Agreements. The stuff that we did in comms when we spoke about some of the comms terms and that when we're talking over the radio, that's laid down in a STANAG 6001, if I remember right. I think it is. So there's thousands of standing NATO agreements that the NATO countries all agreed to, and this particular one relates to the magazines. So the idea behind having a STANAG mag is that we'll just say that, I don't know, the Belgian army decides that they want to change their main assault rifle, and they're going to have a brand new weapon built for themselves. One of the things they will say to any potential manufacturer is, this is the STANAG specification for the magazine, you have to make sure it fits it. Because they want the magazines to be able to be swappable between all the different NATO countries. We then get EPM mags, Enhanced Performance Magazine, initially developed for the A8551 ammunition because the rounds are a little bit larger, needed a bit of a help to get out of the mag, so they built the EPMs. PMAG, polymer-based magazine, manufactured for better efficiency and weight. However, they don't recommend it in really cold climates. Apparently they get very brittle. And the export mag was just another version of the PMAG, right? Now you might think, why do these mags make any difference, right? But I just did some checking just to see if Arma did mirror real life. So if we take an ELF 85, standard British SA-80, right? If you take a 5.56 30-round mag, the M9951 I think it's called, you can fit 17 mags in the particular vest I was carrying. That's 810 rounds. But if you took the 20-round Stanag M855 magazine, you can carry 22 mags, but you only have 440 rounds. If you take the 30-round Stanag mag, you can only carry 420 rounds. So it's really important to look and think about what magazine you're using, and you just need to go through, and this is why I say that you've really got to play with it and look and see, how can I maximize how much actual ammunition I'm carrying. I was actually quite surprised at the difference there when you look at it, and the difference between, I touch on it again, the 7.62 and the 5.56. When I measured those, a 7.62 you can carry 7 magazines in the vest I was using, but I could carry 17 of the 5.56. So these are all considerations that A, you need to think of for your loadouts, but B, also as a mission maker, because picking the right ammunition can mean you don't have to have the hassle of either trying to work in a resupply somewhere or something like that. It gives you it gives you a bit more latitude to say, well, if I give them that weapon with that type of ammunition, they should have enough to get the job done, and I don't have to worry about spawning anything else in.
I guess the other trade-off would be, though, like if you take lots of smaller mags, obviously you've got less bullets in the magazine, you might have to reload more often. So it's like push and pull, isn't it? Especially
it is, and that's why I said these are all the things that you've got to think about. There's a massive amount of things that I'm sure a lot of people just jump into the thing and pick their favourite weapon, and then just go down the list of magazines and just pick a magazine that will fit, without realising that actually you've maybe over half the amount of ammunition you're going to be able to carry. So in this one it says, as it touches on this perfectly, as the previous slide demonstrates, choosing weapons is a potential nightmare, along with all the other stuff. I mean, I'm sure every one of us have taken into equipment into a loadout that we've made ourselves, only to realise that the choice of weapon or the accessories was completely wrong for the op. I reiterate again, there's no substitute to time spent on the training map, comparing weapons, trying different combinations of sights, silencers, etc. Ops are far more fun if you're comfortable with the equipment you have or are given. So give as much thought to your prep as you do to the actual mission. And that stands for whether you're making a loadout for yourself or whether you're designing a mission for the guys. If you're going to do a mission for the guys, don't just think, well, he's a rifleman, do this. Give him a loadout and try it in the mission. So whenever a new mod list comes out, I would advise you jump on the training server and make some basic loadouts for the different factions. You don't need to make a loadout for every role, just a basic rifleman loadout for each of the normal factions we play. So generally, British Army, US Army or Marines, Russian Army. If you've got a basic loadout ready, it's relatively easy and quick to jump into the armory and make the changes needed for different roles. And this is the last part, this is the last slide, guys, and then you can go on your merry ways. So just some pointers when you do go on the training grounds. Test the weapons out in the environment. By that I mean it's easy to shoot bullets down the range, but how does that combination stand up in a CQB environment? How is it at night with NVGs? How quickly can you reload? How is it loaded? As I've said there, bolt actions are great for the long range shooter, but up close and personal, you're going to die. Right? Think also about the combination of weapons. If you've got a long-range rifle with optics, you want to pair that with something that can get you out of trouble in towns, like an MP7. And when you're doing your loadouts, remember to put the other items you will need in your packs, such as medical, radios, etc. You really need to be carrying everything, and then, once you've got all that, play with the ammo mixture, work out how much can I carry, and also, is this the right weapon and ammo for this mission? Could I do better with something else, and don't just go with what is your favourite weapon. Mix and match it a bit and have a play. And that's kind of it. Guys, has anybody got any questions? I mean, I know it's probably all old hat to most of you, but anybody got any questions? No? That's it then.
Well,
we're done.
It was perfect.
Yeah. Good job, Ref.
Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you, Ref. Awesome lecture. I really enjoyed that.
Okay,
Yeah,
mate.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right, I'll put it up in the miss training sectors as well. So yeah, like I said, that'll be up there if you want to read over it again. But as Ref said, there's no replacement for time on the range.
I also streamed it, so I'll chuck it in miss training.
Perfect, excellent. Yeah. All right, you heard the man. You're free to fuck it off now. Have a nice evening.
Viking, what are you up to in the next 20 minutes, half hour?
Right, is anyone going to ask me to do work?
Sort of, yeah. That's why I was asking what you're up to. If you've
I'm
got something better
busy.
to do, no problems.
Yes, very
Not
busy. I'm going to be playing Daisy. I've got way too much work to do, mate.
That's all right. It's not urgent.
Right, guys, for Sam and James, send me your missions when it's done. I will look over it and make sure it works. I do not want to go in. I do not want a breakdown of your mission. I do not want you to go through intricate details with me in regards to how the mission is going to run, because I'm not going to be Zeusing it. You are.
I don't
need
want to do that. I was basically, rather than export it, which I've forgotten how to do, send it to you, and then you look at it and don't realise something that you might think is a mission setting deliberately that I've missed. It was more a case of, I need this to happen. Is that going to work? Sort of thing. That's what I was going to go for. But I don't have to do that today. There can be any time.
I'm sorry. I think I just missed that. Then you want me to help you fix something, or you worried that I might delete something?
No. No. So let's just say, like, I want to run through the basics. For example, making sure, things like spawns and stuff like that work, or all that kind of stuff before I send it to you. So when I send it to you, it's done and it works. If that makes sense.
Right. So the thing is if you test it in multiplayer, the spawns will work. They will work no matter what server it's on. The spawns will work. So test the spawns. It's just certain things like potentially complex triggers with scripts. Those may or may not work. Those are the only things that really don't work in dedicated servers. Apart from that, everything else should work. All right. Do as much testing as you can. Then when you send me the mission, both you and Sam, because Sam, I know you sent me a mission, and anybody else who's sending me missions, or anybody else thinking about sending a mission to me, test as much as you can. And then send it over to me, and then explain if you want me to test anything out or just do it. But all I do for the testing of the missions is boot it up, import the server settings so everyone's nice and happy with their medical settings and blah 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 blah, and their DUI, and the DUI screen's too big and too small. Okay, and that's all I do. I do not test anything else. Oh, and I test to see if the Zeus works. That's it. And the respawns. That's
That's the things I want to check, is just make sure that the basics are working.
Same.
Obviously, testing it on localhost, the Zeus works. I had it working on localhost, and when I put it onto multiplayer server, it didn't work, so I had to fix that. So I know it should work.
Yes. So always test it on multiplayer. Don't always test it on multiplayer. But if something's the matter or you can't get something working, just send me the mission and let me know, and I will do my best to try and fix it or make it work.
No worries.
Right.
You'll have to remind us how to do that at some point, but not right now.
Yeah, that's locally booting it in the multiplayer.
No, how to export the mission. I've been shown before, but it was 6+ months ago, so you can forgive me for forgetting. Not right now though. Right. I don't even want to know right now. Just eventually.
Yeah, I get it. Right. By the way, guys,